So today's tutorial is going to be a little bit about how color works within Wire. I wanted to kind of give a quick example of something that I had put together. This is just using what we've talked about before, the attack release, the trigger, and having a gate that basically switches between those three different options, whether it's you want to be able to trigger it yourself, whether you want it to be a transport beat that's based off of the tap 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 button in your arena or avenue. And then you also have this option of metronome, which basically allows you to speed it up or slow it down as fast or as slow as you want based on the frequency of the speed. So what I'm going to do in this particular case, I'm going to make sure it's set to transport beat, which it is, and then I'm going to push play, and this is what we get. I wanted to kind of give you a quick rundown as to what we have right here, which is what it's doing. So we have a trigger that's basically uh, every beat. It's basically triggering this option to change your random number of the color of the hue of your gradient palette. So in the gradient palette, I have two colors, your min and your max, and it's basically making a gradient palette. It's just doing just that. It's creating a palette out of those colors. It's putting them in a sequential order from the top to the bottom. And so as you'll notice here, it's hard to notice, but if I highlight over this, you'll notice that there is a series of colors that are there. If I hit this drop down box, there we go. This is a little bit better. So now you'll see here are all the colors that it's randomly generating. I'm having it randomly generate by using color from HSB. Color from HSB basically allows me to set the hue spectrum. So if I do, let's just do, I'll set one separate aside. So now I have this one here. We'll make color rise, COLORIZE. We'll make a shape and then I'll put this in that shape. So we're going to do color and then I'm going to do a shape. We'll do heart for the lack of a better shape. And there we are. So now I have a red heart. And the reason being is because our hue is set to 98.18. Hey, Sir Lumpy or Sir Jumpy. Thank you for joining us. So if I move this scale up, this value is from 1 to 255. 1 to 255 is typically the value range. So if I go, excuse me, 0 to 1, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. We're not in this one. It should be 0 to 255. And the reason being is because 255 is like the spectrum of colors. Usually, if you're doing red, green, and blue, you're going from 0 to 254, 255, depending on the program. Some programs will start at 0, some programs will start at 1, like Photoshop will start at 1 and go all the way up to 255. But in any case, what this does is it basically says, I'm going to make a value from this hue, and this value is going to change to yellow based on this color, this number here. This is the hue spectrum, right? And if I shift this, this color will shift. It'll change colors, right? So that's basically the how the color from HSB works. It's hue, saturation, and brightness. It also has an alpha channel in it. Typically, that's not usually there. You usually see just the hue, saturation, and brightness as options when you mess around with HSB. Same thing with RGB. If you do color, there should be one called color to RGB. These are new options within Wire. The newest version of Wire. What is this? 7.21.3. That's when they started adding in these two nodes. They've made a whole bunch of different color changes, and these are two of those color changes. And I'll explain some of the other ones shortly here, but these are the ones I want to focus on right at this moment. So HSB is your hue, saturation, and brightness. And the good thing about that is then you don't really have to mess around with the saturation or brightness. You can if you want, but the thing that I like about this one is it's easy to get a random color very simply by just changing the hue. The saturation you'll notice on the bottom is a little bit dimmer, and the brightness is also a little bit dimmer, and that was on purpose. I wanted it to have like a darker grayer tone in certain areas, but then the top one always be the bright color. So the random generation is from 0 to 255, which is that value. I'm basically changing between 0 to 255 here, and it's doing it on every trigger. So in both of these cases, I'm randomly generating those numbers. And that's what's giving us our gradient palette. And then finally, I'm doing a shuffle here. And the shuffle is important because the shuffle is basically taking all 20 of those colors and it's randomly putting them in a specific order or randomly changing up the order. So every time the gradient palette is triggered, this is also triggering the shuffle. So it sets up a new color palette and randomly generates. Setups the new color, randomly generates, and so on and so forth. And that's because there's 20 instances of these rings. Okay. These rings are nothing more than a circle that's been repeated multiple times. And I've done that even though you can't see it here. It's hard to see it here. And the reason being is because all of them are overlaying on top of each other. So there is a circle set here, but you can't see it. If I change them to edge, you can see them a little bit better because this is just the thickness of the every circle over the top of each other. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm using the colorize to make a random generation of color within those rings, and then I'm merging it all together to basically make sure that this is kind of a thing that I typically do for larger patches. Is when you're using shapes, you want to merge it at the end, and that saves on memory space. Because if you had like five different shapes and they were all made comprised of many different shapes, when you merge them together, you're taking all those shapes and flattening them down, very much like what you would do in Photoshop. So that's pretty much how this is working. There's not really anything crazy with this particular part of the patch. I do want to let you know that this patch is already available on that link that's already should be up on uh, the VJ live visuals, VJ underscore live underscore visuals. But if you do need the link, let me know and I'll link it to you. I'll put it in the description. So that's pretty much how this is generating the color. I wanted to give you some other examples, however, of other things you can do with color. So in this particular case, I've taken a fractal noise. Oh, before we start this, let me just go over this real quick. So this colorize node, this is an interesting thing. And the reason being is because the colorize node will basically, it'll overlay your color on top of your shape. Okay, or anything for that matter. It doesn't have to be a shape. It could be a threshold, for instance. So if I do threshold, threshold is basically like grayscale, right? But it's a way of isolating like colors. So if I take my threshold and I plug it into here, you'll notice that it's not showing you everything. It's just showing you the whites of this image. So it's just going to be these areas here, and these areas here because the threshold is set up so high. If I scroll this back, you'll notice that I'll get more of the gradients of color because it's based on the light value. So actually the easier way would be like this. If I go grayscale, for instance, and I plug this into the grayscale, this is what the system sees. Okay. And so when I plug this into here, there's not much difference here, as you can see. Okay. So the reason why I'm grabbing the threshold is because I wanted to show you this example. If I plug this into the colorize, you'll notice that things do turn that color. They are that red color. If I ex- but the problem with this is that you'll notice that it's like here it's like solid red, right? And the reason being is because the colorize does not replace what's already in that layer, the colorize would basically overlays or puts it on top of what you already have. So it's something to keep in mind because when you're using your colorize, one of the biggest issues that I run into is there'll be times where I want this to be transparent. I want the heart to be transparent. So, I would say, "Oh, well, the only, that's pretty easy. All I need to do is just change my alpha. Just drag my alpha down." So if you look over here, right, my heart, the color is the hue that I've already got in place, but you'll notice the alpha is 0. So technically this should be transparent. I shouldn't see the heart. But the reason being is because the colorize does not allow for that alpha effect. And the reason being is because this is just overlapping on top of what's already there. This is a crucial point because there is a way to fix this. If you wanted to make it so that that was being not being it wasn't that case. What you would do is you would use a mask and you would do a solid color. And what you would do is you would plug your solid color into the top of the mask, but then use the heart as the mask for the heart. Okay? And the reason for this is because the solid color is able to have the alpha channel turned off. So now if I go back to my mask, it's no longer there. But if I slowly increase my solid color and go back to my mask, you'll notice that it's transparent. And this is a really crucial thing. This is actually one of the things that I ran into with the latest patch that I've been creating called True Shea pattern. The True Shea pattern that I've been using, I wanted a way for the user to have their media effects, whatever they're using, their photographs, their video, whatever's going on behind it, to bleed through. And so this was one of the things that I really wanted to push forward. Okay, so we've kind of talked that through. And the reason why I wanted to show you it within the threshold is because what you could also do is, for instance, I have my threshold here. I could plug this into the threshold, and you'll notice that now this is being used as the threshold or is used as the mask for this solid color. And when you're using a mask, the black is going to be transparent and the white is going to be opaque. You're not going to be able to see through it. But notice as I back off the smoothness, you'll notice that there's a sort of semi-transparent going on there. And the reason being is because I'm getting a different mask. If I just adjust this ever so slightly, see if I can get a better example. We're on dot screen. I'm going to go back to this main fractal noise. I'm going to plug in my fractal noise here. And the reason why is because I want the smoothness of the gray areas because I wanted to show this off. Okay, so here we have a threshold. I'm going to drag the threshold down or up. And now when we look at this, you'll notice that the areas that are transparent are the places where there's gray. And the places where there are black, it's completely transparent. It's completely alpha channeled. Where it's white is where you see it the most. So just kind of keep that in the back of your head. It's important to understand how masking works. I know that I've kind of gone over it multiple times, but it was one of those things when I figured out how masking works. It's like the light bulb came on my brain and I was able to do all kinds of fun stuff. And it's really a nifty technique. I think it's very important. So I just wanted to show off some of the other things that they've been working on. Although this is a terrible example, I'm going to try to use this or attempt to kind of explain how this works. The reason why is because this little option is a new option. It's called sample texture. Sample texture will basically you can put in the position of where you want it to sample your color and the radius or the size of the sample. And when you do a size of the sample, depending on how big the radius is, it takes an average of all the colors within that radius. And you get a, a pretty solid color of that particular area. The reason why I say this is a really bad example is because I tried my hardest to figure out a way to make it so that you could show this little red dot. And if I put that little red dot on the white, you'll notice the color is still not the right color. And the reason being is because I think it has to do with I'm this move and this float that I've created to move this little red dot everywhere. I don't think this is in relation to this because this is by position of pixels and this is in position of the algorithm in the middle, right? So the point of origin is 0, 0, right? So 0, 0 would be in the middle, and then -2, -1 or 1.5, right? So it's a different way of working, and I think that's the reason why this doesn't work. But I did want to show this to you so that you know that you can basically sample the color texture by basically knowing the position of where this would be in space. So, like for instance, this is roughly close to the middle of the screen, right? So if this is 1920 by 1080, excuse me, 1920 would be 540 ish, and then 1080 would be 540. Actually, that's 540. Excuse me, and 1920 would be like a little over, so like somewhere in 700 range, right? Um, So I'm trying to give you an example, and I apologize. I probably should have worked this out ahead of time. But this will basically allow you to find those values and sample that area within that position. So if you knew your position of your screen, you could technically like pick this color or pick this color. And there are some really nifty features about that because then you have the solid color worked out. You'll notice that this one is pink. The reason why this one is pink is because I haven't updated the thumbnail. If I update the thumbnail, it's white now. So I just wanted to kind of give that as an example. All right. So let's go in through some other stuff real quick. So we have this dot screen that I created from this fractal noise. All I did was just basically use the fractal noise, which is something that comes default with Wire. It's a default fractal noise. There's nothing really crazy. I could set it to Perlin noise, right? But all it does is just basically has different color channels. This is just the purple and green. You could set it up to RGB, right? And so then it gives you this kind of like craziness. And then I put a dot screen on top of it. Nothing crazy there. It is just a simple dot screen. You can change the scale of your size of your dots. This creates that halftone pattern. So then also what I did was I added in a threshold. This threshold is basically set with a pink and a purple, or excuse me, a fuchsia and a cyan color. These can be any color that you choose through the color spectrum. You can also then set these as well if you wanted to with the thing that we were talking about before, this random. You could do is you could actually take this option and scroll it back or scroll it down or move it down, excuse me. And then what you could do is you could just plug this into your color one and this into your color two. And now we have a random generation color of those bases as well. And the cool thing about this is then you could also put these on dials if you wanted to and really kind of mess around with them. We need to change the dot screen, however. Let's increase we don't want to increase the scale, but we do want to increase the brightness. So that's going to be our gain. Let's go the opposite direction. So now we have 4.5, and now if I go to dot screen, that looks a little better. And so now we have this craziness going on, right? And we could bump up the threshold. We could drag down the smoothness or add in smoothness. And you'll notice that it'll try its hardest to create gradations in between that dot screen. I could take the saturation down just a little bit, and you get this nice little effect, right? So that's some pretty nice stuff. We've already pretty much talked about the colorize option. However, what I did want to do is go through some other features with color. The linear color or the linear node is the new node to be used for creating a gradient scheme. You'll notice that it says size 10. That basically means that there are 10 colors in between this fuchsia, this pinkish color, and this purple color. If I highlight over my 10, you'll notice that it'll show all 10 colors right there. Uh, what I'm doing is I'm basically using this linear and I'm plugging it into an expand. An expand basically just does just that. It takes those 10 colors and it's going to expand it into 20. And if I hit the little arrow, here's my 20 colors. Okay. You'll notice that once it gets to a certain a range, it will just repeat the range over again. And the reason why is because the size of the first one was 10. So there's only 10 colors it has to play with. So what happens is it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, And then once it gets to 10, it says, oh, I'm just going to repeat these because I have no other colors because the first linear set was 10. Okay, but I'm expanding it to 20. So what that does to expand it is it just basically makes two sets of 10, basically. Okay, however, it's set to repeat. What I could also do is do ping pong. And when I do ping pong, it actually takes those colors and it makes a ping pong. It makes a, so pink starts, right? And then it goes all the way to 10. And then at 10, it goes backwards instead of counting forwards. So now the 9 is now the 11 and so on and so forth. So and then the 8 is the 12 and so on and so forth, right? So it creates this gradation in between. So if I go into my colorize, let me just check to make sure I'm going in the right place. What did I do here? That's my dot screen. That's my colorize. Go to palette, drag that over here. And that shouldn't be that color. Why am I messing with that color? Oh, I bet you it's because I have the hue rotate there. Let me just make sure. Yep. Okay. So, what I've done is I wanted to explain this a little bit more. I apologize. I kind of went on a tangent there for a second. Okay, so this was the set that we were looking at just a second ago, right? So we were looking at the expand. The expand is basically expanding that color, and it's using the ping pong. There's also the option for clamp, which is going to be different from the other two. So repeat and ping pong, and then there's clamp. And clamp works a little bit different from the other two. You'll notice that what it does is it basically tries its hardest to arrange those colors, right? Because it's going from the topmost value to the bottommost value. But it's keeping them in the range of spectrum, right? So it's still going from pink to the purple. However, it's basically going pink, pink, purple, purple, or it's going pink, pink, violet, violet, this more purplish blue color, and it just keeps repeating itself two times every time. And the reason being for that is because there's 20 output sizes to this, right? But there's only 10 values that are available, so it's just duplicating the values. Then what I have here is I have the shift. So for shift, I'm just going to go back over to the colorize. I just want to show this off, right? So shift, you can actually shift where the colors start. So as you move this around, it's creating this spectrum. It's rotating that spectrum. So if I go in here, you'll notice that the start of the pink is at 7. If I scroll up even more, we'll go to 29. The start of the spectrum is now at 9 because I've gone up 2, right? Or I've gone down 2, right? And so it just constantly rotates. So this is kind of nifty because you could be on ping pong, for example, and ping pong is just basically repeating, it's going pink to pink, but then it's also going back to purple and back to pink and back to purple. So it's creating this repeat, right? So if I scroll through this, you get this nice, evenly distributed color spectrum. And this is very, very cool. This is actually one of the things that I use for my halftone motion. When I created the first patch that I ever created, I used this as a way to cycle through the colors. The other thing that this is doing, the shift is plugged into, or this set here is plugged into texture from data. And the reason why I'm using texture from data is because that is the what do they call that? Input type that is required in order for Colorize to use it, right? Because I'm plugging in as a palette. So because this is a palette, I need to shift it from to a texture from data from what it is already. So it's color right at this moment, and I need to change it to a texture to D RGBA so that the colorize node knows how to use it. Because in the colorize node, I've changed it to palette. If this was color, you'll notice that it tries to unplug it. I could plug it back in, if I just take back to shift, but it's only going to choose one of those colors. It's not going to choose all 20 colors. I can shift the colors, but it's not going to shift it with a palette. The palette's a little bit different if I'm using just a singular color, because in this example, I'm using just color mode within the colorize. Okay. So if I'm doing just a color mode within the colorize, it's only going to choose one color from that palette. Okay. And that's the reason why that happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the palette and I'm going to take the texture from data, plug it into the palette, and you'll notice now I have that spectrum. The reason why this is nifty is because I could take this shift and there's a couple things that I could do. I could oscillate it with a scene oscillator, SINE, and this will basically bounce back and forth, uh, or it should. I had problems with this before. What did I end up doing? I can do an accumulate, I think. And then if I plug that into a float in and I plug that in, now that should work. Yeah, there we go. So now I have a similar kind of thing, right? So now it's it's accumulating a number, and I think that's the reason why, because there is a way to do it the other way around. I'm just trying to remember what specifically. The scene oscillator can do it, but there's something else that has to be put in place, and I forget why off the top of my head. If you want to know, just get with me, and I'll look into some of my other patches where I've done this and figure it out. I believe it has something to do with the offset and where it starts. I think is how that works. But in any case, that's how the color shift happens that you can make this colorize. Like before, like I said, this colorize is only overlaying or over it's only basically giving that value it's how it's trying to think of the word. Okay, for example, if I go back and I change this alpha to 0, you'll notice that the only color that seems to be uh, uh, allowed to affect the fractal noise is only the purple. And the reason why is because this is on bottom of the colorize, right? So if I go back to pink, it'll go back to the fractal or the cycling. All right. So I'm going to stop that right at this moment, and I'm going to use this hue rotate. And actually, I'm going to plug this into another color in. Okay. Color in is your friend. So there's a couple different options. There's color in, and then there's color. There's really no big difference between these two. The only difference is that this one is actually added into your dashboard for uh, Arena and Avenue. Excuse me. So if I plug this into here, now I can rotate that color. So I'm gonna change this color to like blue. All right, and as I rotate through the color scheme, we got to plug this into something so that we can see it first. I'm going to plug this into here and move it back. And I'm going to change this back to color and change this to this. And we're going to make this gain just a little bit higher or this. Oh, yeah, that's right. Let's change this. Let's take off channels and then just change the gain. I guess we can't make it much brighter. You know what? I could just do a levels. Let's just do a levels and plug that in here and then do this. And then let's try to see if we can change those values just a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better for what we're trying to do because I want to basically kind of give the idea. that as I change this hue rotate, it rotates through the color spectrum. Very similar to what we did here in the linear, but the difference here is that there's only one color and it's hue rotating between those colors. So there are some nice features here because this is the hue scale, right? But then we also have the option for rotate. So as we rotate, it's going to rotate through this full spectrum of the colors of the color rainbow, right? And then you also have a saturation scale here, which does exactly that. It changes the saturation of the color, right? So one of the things that's nice about this is you could take this, for instance, and there's no end to this circus, as I've said multiple times. You could plug this into here, and you could plug, and I'm going to drag this up, and I'm going to set this back to, yeah, that's close enough. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this one, I'm gonna plug this one in, right? So now I'm gonna have this one going here and this one going here. I'm gonna choose a different color. We'll choose yellow. So now I have this yellow color and then I have this color in, right? And now if I take this accumulate, I can then basically plug this into this and plug this into this. And so now if I take my texture in from data, change this back to palette, okay? Now I get this craziness. Let's slow that down just a little bit. That's a little too fast. Um, but now not only am I shifting the colors, I'm also shifting the colors here. So you're getting just a whole machination of color rotations, right? Because I'm rotating these colors from these color spectrums. If I did a solid color or do a color, I think I could do it this way, right? So if I plug this into here, you should be able to see the color. You cannot. Okay, so then that would mean that I would probably need to do a solid color. And if I do a solid color, you can see here's what this looks like, right? If I change the saturation down, you'll notice it'll just go to gray. It won't change at all. And the reason why is because we're on gray. There is no hue rotate on gray, right? And then hue scale, which I believe the hue scale is how fast it transitions between the colors. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure as to why hue scale versus hue rotate. I know that hue rotate is to rotate the spectrum. Hue scale, I'm not 100% on. But basically, you get this color, and then if I move this one over here, set this one. So now we have two of them going at the same time, right? And then those are going into the linear, which basically this is a good way of showing it. If I select this, right, you can see the colors are rotating through the spectrum. Let me get a little closer so you can see that, like that. So now you can see that we're getting a linear of that color gradient that's being made by those two colors, but it's transitioning the colors at the same time. So this is a very powerful tool because this is a very interesting way of changing the way in which your palette looks. This is just a small, like simple thing, but you could, and technically you could take this same accumulate and you could plug it into, actually, let's do a float. I like to do a float 3 when I do changes to my noise, and I'll show you why in just one second. Float 3. The problem with a float in your fractal noise is that the first two values are your left and right and top and bottom. So it'll just basically scroll. But if you plugged this accumulate in here, you're just going to get this constant, like it's just moving diagonally, right? I typically only want to change the Z value so that the whole entire thing is moving stationary, um, but it's doing this, like, almost like you're watching water. I like that look better. But this is it really kinda gives it a nice effect, right? So we've talked about hue rotate. Okay. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns? I'm gonna keep moving. Alright, so I have this color in here, which is just basically this blue color. I've plugged it into a Nagulus. Hue scale is like the rotation, but hue scale. 0, it starts at red. So you can start every time on the same color if fixing hue scale to a specific point. So far, so good. Super cool stuff. Okay. So there's also these two new options that they've added, analogous colors and complementary colors. They've added these two values because this could be potentially this could add some real nice features to your wire patches because you could do the analogous color of the color you choose. So like for instance, I have this blue right at this moment. I could choose like a series of different colors and it'll choose up to 8 analogous colors to the main color that was chosen. If I remember correctly, the analogous colors is like across the spectrum, but it's like a range of spectrum, right? So, like for instance, if I or that's complementary. Analogous, I think, is in the same color range, right? So if you're on the blue and I choose three colors that technically should be the to the left of the blue and to the right of the blue. And so you get this kind of orange color and this green color, right? Also, it could be because my hue range is so high. If I did like 1, I think this is going to choose, yeah. So you see now you have analogous colors that are closer to the range of where it is. Okay, complementary colors is the same kind of thing except for it's the opposite side of the color spectrum. So this is blue, so therefore, if I switch our analogous um, uh, uh, option drop down, we'll get the complementary color to the blue, which is this yellowish color. If I make this more blue, it should change orange, like this blue. If I change, oh, I know why, because I bet you it's because my hue range needs to be changed. So now if I go to this orange, now I get a blue, right? And if I go from orange to blue, I should get this yellow color, which doesn't make exactly a lot of sense because that should be like red, green, blue. If I move this in, see now it's changing, but you'll notice that this is like a cerulean and this is more like a gold. When I think of blue and orange because they're complementary colors, this is not exactly the blue and orange that I think of, right? Same thing with green and red. But this is a new feature that they've just added recently. You'll notice, like for instance, this is like a red and this is a cerulean blue. It could be because the range is too far or it needs to be further away. That doesn't seem to make a difference. If I and see, no, that's not going to help either. But that is its primary goal is to do is to change the RGB values so that they're the opposite of the complementary color. I'm going to have to talk to them about that because that's not really a green, that's a cerulean blue. That's interesting. Okay, so that is how those are supposed to work. Um, I know that they've been working on them. Maybe I'm using them wrong. However, that is what analogous color and complementary colors are supposed to do. Then we have the option of unpack. The unpack for colors has changed since the latest version of Wire. Now, not only do we have the red, green, and blue and alpha channels, but then we also have the hue, saturation, and brightness, the HSB. So you have the RGB and the HSB in the unpack. And that's important because there may be times where you want to unpack a color from a specific image and you can unpack it the values, right? So if I take this out and I plug this into this, now we have this value of red, green, and blue. But you'll notice that this is set to just black and white. So if I change that, now I should get the red, green, and blue alpha channels. So if I go video mixer, right, and I plug in my red, that's what my red looks like. That's what my green looks like. Right, it doesn't look right, and the reason being is because it's only giving you the grayscale values of those colors. So if I take this one out, for instance, you'll notice that this is just like a black and white, right? But that's the red value of this. So really, it would look more like you would do a colorize. Well, actually, you could do it a couple ways. You could repack the values. I'm trying to remember how that is. There is a node that will allow you to pack back the colors. And let me think about what that was. I want to say it's a video color to HSB, color from channels. You can do texture from channels, but I don't think. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so if I take these and I plug these back into here, right? You'll notice that I'll get the same thing because I've unpacked it and then repacked it. There may be cases where you want to do this, like for instance, let's say you had something that was, you wanted some crazy look, right? You could, in theory, swap these around just a little bit. It's hard to see in this particular type of case, but you'll notice, like right now, it's got this now cyan and red, right? Because I've kind of moved around some of these colors. So then what I could do is I could like take this and I could swap this around, right? So now I have these opposite colors. Why did that do that? That should be able to go to blue. Go to blue. There we go. Okay. So this is kind of a bad example, but if I go and go video in, no, texture in, not, sorry, texture in, not video in. If I go texture in, I have this pattern, okay, and I unpack it, you'll notice that the color's changed, right? And I could leave out a color. I could move this color up. And then you could also add things into here. So like for instance, our little accumulate, if I added in a hue rotate, doop, and I plug that into this and plug that into, nope, 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 won't let me, will it? No, it won't. And I think it's because these values are different, right? So that's a texture 2D. This one's a texture 2D RGBA. I don't know if it'll allow me to do that. Channel. There are ways you can add values to that. Add. Can I just add? Yes. Okay. So then I can take this accumulate and I can add it there. And it should. Is that value changing? It is. That value is not changing because it's not a number. That's the reason why. There is a way to do that. I just have to think about how that works. But basically, it allows you to have all kinds of different options. Uh, because this value is a black and white, it doesn't work in the same way as you would typically do with a hue rotate, where um, it has to do with this is channel packing or setting up a channel, right? So this would be for threshold. So you could I do a threshold actually? Would it even let me do that? Threshold. And then if I take that, plug that in there and plug this, no, it won't. Okay. I'll have to look that up. There is a way you can basically take these textures from channels and you can arrange them. I've done it with a video mixer because video mixers are a little bit more forgiving than the texture from channel, right? So then you could basically plug this in. You could create the same RGB. I think there is. Can you do that with this? I think you can. Yeah. And then add a third channel and created like a whole bunch of channels, but that's all right. And then red, green, and blue. But it's not going to do what I think it's going to do, is it? But you'll see that this is like it's giving you these red, green, and green. I know what I did. So what I did in order to do this was I actually made these into colorized. That's how I did it. Colorize like that, right? So I have red, green, blue, or you know, like that, green, blue, They're all set to 50%. I plugged one into here, one into here, and one into here. And I did like this, green, blue. And then how did I change this? I think I changed this to like, was it alpha? Yeah, that kind of works. But then if I remember correctly, I had some issues with, I don't think it was alpha. I think it was like one of the other modes. Definitely wasn't black and white. Um, so now like difference you get there. So now we have this one that's kind of like a yellowish hue. This is difference. This one's pretty close exclusion. Soft light. There should be one. It's not overlay. There's one that you can make it so that it's set to, well, exclusion's pretty close. But then what you could do is you could actually like change your values, right? And then this could also have that. Now I can do the hue rotate, right? So I could take this, plug this into here, and then change that by changing the hue rotate. And now it's going to accumulate. It's going to cycle through the colors, right? And you could do the same thing with all of them. And so you get this kind of weird color spectrum that's going through. So some things to tinker with. The final things I just wanted to kind of give you an understanding of the color in and the saturation. These four nodes here are this one has been added, this one has been added since the latest version. Saturation is exactly that. It's exactly what you think it is. It's the saturation of the color, right? So as you get closer to the right, it's going to be oversaturated. As you get to the left, it's undersaturated, so it's going to be gray. And in the middle is what it is already. The add subtract is exactly that. It is a way to change the value of the color. So like for instance, right now it's red. This is RGB, right? So here's my channels up at the top. Actually, let's scroll in here, right? So if I wanted to add or subtract color, I could. 10 red, negative 30 green, and we'll say 100 blue, right? And so now I get this color. So if you knew your color schemes and how it worked, or if you wanted a specific kind of tint to your color in, so like right now I've got this because I've added and subtracted to that color. The solid color is what we've talked about before. It's the solid color node. I just wanted to make sure it was in here. And then the vibrance is exactly the same kind of thing as your vibrance or as your saturation, except it's the vibrance of the color, so it acts a little bit different. The vibrance versus the saturation. Saturation is the desaturated and the saturated, so it's like it's sapping the color out of it. The vibrance is the vibrancy of the color, right? So, um, excuse me. Think of like glow. Your vibrance is going to be more of that. So that's pretty much what that is doing. The vibrance could be interesting for glowing kind of things, right? So if you had, what's a good example? We have this thing over here doing this. We'll play with that for a little bit. So we could move this up. Uh, let's add a video mixer. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a threshold out of that. However, sorry, thinking this through. We want to make a mask out of this, I believe. So let's do that. Mask. And we're going to take this and drag it into here. And we'll just take the colorize and drag it into here. There. So we get this kind of flowy motion, right? This is the color cycle that we were creating with a hue and rotate, right? And then this is the fractal noise that we were creating. And so I'm using this as my mask for the colorize. So we're getting these color spectrums. And the reason why is because I wanted something with a transparency. And the reason why I want a transparency is because I'm going to plug my vibrancy into this. and bump it up to 11, which I've already done. And I'm going to plug that into the backside of this video mixer. So I'm creating a feedback loop into the video mixer, and now I'm getting these kind of like striations, right? What I can do, however, is change this to like difference, or there's colorize, and I get this interesting looking pattern. That vibrance should be more than just that. Vibrance should be changing the vibrancy of the colors. Okay, it is changing the vibrancy of the colors. Okay. So then what I could do is I could actually plug that into a bloom. It's gonna crash my system, but that's besides the point. Bloom. So I'm gonna take the vibrancy, plug the vibrancy into the bloom, and then take the bloom and plug it into that, into my delay. And I'm gonna get a crazy mess. Doo doo. And we'll turn down the vibrancy. See if we can control it a little bit better. And that's because my Gaussian. Bloom is lots of fun, but it takes a little bit of time and finessing to practice to get it to play well with others. And I think it's because we're using the vibrancy at the wrong time, maybe. So let's plug that into there, and then let's plug this into here, and plug this into there. That's a little better. See, now we're not getting the craziness, but now we're getting this like pools of water, and then it's creating this vibrancy, which could be bumped up just a little bit, and it creates this crazy mess. So this is what it looked like before, and then adding a little bit of bloom and a little bit of vibrancy, and we get this like just craziness. Could bump this down just a little bit and a little bit in video mixer, and then change this from dodge to like occlusion. Hard light, that's pretty interesting. Let's take this back down to 0 and then bring it back. Okay, so that is that. Okay. The thing with delay is that when you're using delay, it's actually going to keep the delay that you're adding into it, right? So if you already had something that was being delayed on your screen, you might want to change your opacity to 0 for that delay layer, because sometimes it may keep that as a record, as an artifact record from the previous blend mode that you were using. That's pretty wild. That's the displace, because it's that's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to play with that later. All right. So that is the color. Did you guys have any questions about how color works? About any of this crazy mess? So if you took in like a color in, I have two color ins here. I could attach them to a switch. Okay. And then what I could do is do a float, or actually would be an int in. Right, because the difference here is that int in is whole numbers and float is decimal numbers, right? So I have two values here, so I'm going to use an int in. I'm going to change my options count to 2, and then make sure one value is 0, one value is 1. And so now I could change this to red, and I could change this to blue, right? And then I could do colorize and plug this into my colorize, my color, okay? And then we'll do a texture in, like that. And so this is going to be your feed. Whatever your feed in is going to be the texture in. Okay. So in your patch, what you would do is you would set up the texture in to the texture out. Texture out. Okay. And then what you do is now anytime this is swapped, it's going to change to the other color that you chose. Okay. Um, so you could have it hard coded to specific colors, or there are other things that you could do as well, like you could have it on a dial to go to a hue rotate, and then you basically dial in the color that you're specifically looking for. But if you had a color scheme in mind, you could set it this way. And then this doesn't have to be, the switch doesn't have to be a singular color. It could also be a linear color, a linear gradient. So if you had a specific gradient map or gradient set, so we'll do this one to this one and this one to this one, and then we'll unplug these like that, and then we'll scroll down. We'll borrow some of this here. We're going to borrow this. Copy, paste, just so that I don't have to make another set. It's already done. Excuse me. Don't need that. We're going to use this one and this one. Plug this one into here. Plug this one into here. And so now the colorize is palette. Plug this into the palette. Why did that not work? Because it's trying to connect them both. No. Oh. I know why. Because I need to do two texture data. Texture from data. Plug this into here. Plug this one into here. And now we have this color set, which actually is a hue. Is this hue, right? Because I've done the hue rotate. Actually, if I just take this out and take this out, this makes more sense. Okay, so you have this color spectrum and this color spectrum and using this drop-down box. And the other thing that's nice about Wire is that you can actually use, instead of a drop-down, you can use buttons. So it doesn't show in your Wire patch specifically. However, in your dashboard for your arena or avenue, you'll get this like thing. So you'll have two buttons to choose from, or how many of your buttons you have. Now, the only issue with this would be it would only affect just the one. Well, actually, that's not entirely true because you could put it on the layer instead of a specific clip, right? In your arena or avenue. So if you put it on like on the entire layer as an effect, then it would affect anything within that layer. And if you know how to isolate your stuff, like if you know, like if you have alpha channels set up, technically you could do that as well. Like you could, I don't know, like you could do a threshold, right? Like we were doing before, and you could have like specific colors like to choose. um, there's two ways to do that. Well, actually, there's more than two ways. But like for instance, this is going to just take a threshold value of all the blacks and whites, right? But then if I did a mask, excuse me, if I did a mask and I plug that in and then I choose this like that, and then what I do is other way around. I'm sorry, like this. Now I have those color values, but then what I could do is I could do like a video mixer like that. And then I can plug that into, so I have the color that I'm using. I want that as a mask over the top of this original, right? So then the original is bleeding through, but there's the mask of those colors that is like overlaid on top of the original, right? And then you could change between the two. And so you get the effect of the original, but you've only changed specific color schemes. So, like, for instance, if you knew how to build this out, like, for instance, you could, in theory, have, like, I don't know, like, you see them all the time where they have these, like, faces of things that are just like, ah, and they're, dancing along, right? If you knew how to break this down, you could create a mask of the areas in which you want specific colors, only those specific colors to change. You have to create the masks for it, but if you can create the masks for it, then you can basically change the color at will at any time by just pushing a button, and then the system doesn't care. It sees it as two different, like it's a if then true else kind of thing. It's just a programming thing. So it just says, "Oh, you want to use blue? Okay, no problem." So now it's blue. It's the same animation, but it's just the blue scheme version of whatever you created. And then you have a red scheme of everything you created. And you could also break it down to, like, for instance, if there's certain effects where the blue one is ice and the red one is fire and the purple one is lightning and so on and so forth. You could have certain effects that are on certain layers of all the lightning, all the fire, and all the ice. And then you just choose a color blue and it basically, now you're in the ice one. And so then you just basically change your layers for the ice set. And so there's really great ways you could break this down. And this is also something that's important as well. You have the option for chroma key, which would basically allow you to isolate specific colors. Right. So if you knew the color value, like everything that's green, you wanted it to be a certain color, you could use the chroma key to replace those colors. And all you would need to do is like plug in, like you could just make another video mixer, add another layer to the video mixer, and just add that to the top. And so now everywhere where there's a specific color, which is right at this moment green, I could change that to like the blue section, let's say, and we can change the hue threshold. So now it's going to choose most of the blue, and we can drag it to the left a little bit. So now it's not choosing the purple, it's just choosing the blues and greens, and now they're being changed to this color, which we want the other one. Let's do the other one. And so now see if we can make that a little bit more extravagant, because I'm using that as a mask the other way around. Let's do the other way around, black. Um, there's a way you could do that. So you would convert this to a black. Let me think. Show mask. There we go. Okay. So this shows a mask, and so then what you would do is you would plug this into your mask. So this is going to be my mask. So now it's just replacing just those colors, right? So now if I do that, I could invert this, and now it's just changing those ones. So now, what is this? There, like that. So now I'm just changing the blue values to this purple bluish hue. And then now they're changed to the red purplish hue. Oh, and the spectrum, we can change it to any of the parts of the spectrum. And then there's all kinds of like I said before, there's no end to this circus. If you know how to use chroma key and you know how to use a threshold on a mask, you could isolate any color on your palette and physically change it at will. This is one of those ways where you could do that. Now, there are other things that you could do in theory, like if the color, certain colors, like they use green screens, right, all the time. Green screens are great excuse me, for certain things, but the biggest problem that you'll have with a green screen is that the fringe colors are the colors of that green that are on the fringe, right? The yellowish hue green and this bluish kind of color, like the cyan, are going to be like the colors that are just slightly off to the edges. So you'll get these moments where those colors are still there. There are ways to remove those colors, like you could, it's all about setting up ahead of time. If you had the time ahead of time to figure out, okay, I want to be able to make sure that this is always going to be a specific color set, you could, in ahead of time, create a scene that's just completely pure black and white, and then add in your color afterward, um, to your heart's content. Like they give you so many different tools to play with. It really just depends on, like, you just have to break it down. You have to figure out, okay, what is it that I want to change, and how do I want to change it? I obsess over color probably a little bit more than I probably should. Um, but I think it's also one of those things where it'd be great to be able to adjust certain things in certain scenes. You want to make something completely green and you don't want that blue to show up or whatever. There are ways that you can work around it. It's some of it is kind of, you're trying to find the shortest way to get to those places. I'm kind of talking myself in a circle here, but it's it really is case by case basis because I can think of multiple instances where I had changed a color and I was thinking this is the color that the customer wanted. But then there's this yellow fringe hue that is not technically yellow, but because of the entire image, it reads as yellow. And so you have to get creative about removing certain colors. Uh, but the tools are there. That's what I'm basically trying to say. The tools are there with the chroma key, with the threshold, with the ability to change the colors to anything that you want. So, like for instance, you could, in theory, chroma key a certain color out, but then there's this green hue that's still there. Well, you could hue adjust it. And then at the end, you could then make everything that is green or whatever a red, and it will physically look like an entirely different scene because of those color changes.